Atlantis versus Hyperborea, the war that drowned the world. Allow me to tell you about what happens when the legends we've heard since childhood suddenly stop being mere myths and start seeping into our reality, leaving behind unsettling questions and unspoken ambiguities. Imagine a world where not just one, but a staggering two incredibly advanced civilizations existed simultaneously on Earth, each representing a peak of technological and spiritual progress that we, modern people, can't truly even begin to conceive, can we? These aren't just stories of lost cities, these are histories of mighty powers whose legacy still stirs the minds of researchers globally, compelling us to ask what exactly happened in those distant epochs. We are talking about Atlantis, the jewel of the western oceans, and Hyperborea, the mysterious northern abode, and today we will attempt to unravel the ball of ancient traditions to understand if these colossal forces might have clashed in a battle that changed the face of our planet forever. The idea of a conflict between Atlantis and Hyperborea has been in the air for a very long time, serving as a kind of axis around which many occult, esoteric, and even some scientific theories revolve. Plato mentioned them, speaking of the incredible might and subsequent fall of Atlantis, but he did not give us a complete understanding of the entire world picture of that time. And that's just the beginning. We've heard that Atlantis was a kingdom of abundance, where inhabitants used certain crystal technologies that allowed them to control energy that we can only dream about, and it flourished somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And what about Hyperborea? That name evokes images of a land of eternal sun, which is utterly paradoxical considering its supposed location somewhere in the Arctic latitudes. And there, according to tradition, lived not merely people, but a kind of godlike beings who possessed the deepest spiritual knowledge. How could two such different yet equally powerful cultures have collided? Let's look at what the ancient sources tell us. In many myths and legends of various peoples around the world, from the Indian Vedas to the Scandinavian Eddas, echoes can be found of a great catastrophe or war that preceded our current cycle of civilization. These tales often feature flying chariots, weapons of the gods, capable of destroying entire cities, and, most importantly, mentions of two great forces opposing each other. Don't you find it strange when completely unrelated peoples, separated by thousands of miles, suddenly start telling similar stories about the grand finale of a former era? Take for example the legends of the Vajra in Hinduism, the weapon of the god Indra, which by description strongly resembles some kind of high-tech energy discharge capable of inflicting colossal damage. And what if we apply this knowledge to the stories that Atlantis may have reached the peak of its power by using energy for military purposes? Some researchers, such as Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, directly indicated in their works that the Atlanteans, towards the end of their existence, became overly materialistic and used their knowledge for domination, which became their fatal mistake. Hyperborea, in contrast, was always described as a civilization guarding spiritual knowledge and balance. Doesn't it seem to you that this alone creates the grounds for an ideological and consequently a military conflict? Let's delve into archaeology, though here we step onto shaky ground, where proof sometimes dissolves into conjecture. Unexplained artifacts are found in various parts of the world, from processed stones with perfectly smooth surfaces that seem impossible to create without modern tools, to underwater ruins such as those discovered off the coast of Japan, Yonaguni, whose dating causes intense debate. Could these findings be traces of not just great, but warring civilizations? Isn't it logical to assume that if two superpowers possessed such might, the traces of their confrontation should be no less grandiose than their achievements? Consider what might have been the catalyst for war. Perhaps it was a struggle for resources, though such developed civilizations presumably should have had everything they needed, but as history shows, even the wealthiest powers can enter into conflict because of greed or ideology. Or perhaps it was a clash of worldviews, the spiritual path of Hyperborea versus the technological path of Atlantis. Imagine that the Hyperboreans, possessing the gift of foresight, understood that the Atlanteans' technological frenzy would inevitably lead to a catastrophe for the entire planet, and decided to intervene. In this version of the conflict, Hyperborea acts as the defender of the Earth, and Atlantis as the aggressor seeking complete dominance. The most compelling, though frightening, evidence of the war are the stories of global floods and catastrophes that supposedly destroyed these civilizations. Plato, as we recall, spoke of Atlantis vanishing in one day and one disastrous night. But what if this was not simply a natural catastrophe, but the final act of a war, where some kind of weapon of mass destruction was used, which we can only conditionally call technological? Some researchers suggest that the fall of Atlantis was provoked by the disabling of their main energy crystal, which led to a tectonic shift in submergence. And who, other than another superpower, could possess the knowledge and might to deliver such a precise and crushing blow? And it is not excluded that the retaliatory actions of Atlantis could have caused those cataclysms, which, according to tradition, changed the Earth's axis and caused an ice age, which perhaps destroyed Hyperborea. Let's consider another mysterious aspect: the location. If Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, then Hyperborea, according to a number of myths, was supposed to be beyond the North Wind, or beyond the Arctic Circle. And here arises an incredibly intriguing question. How could a civilization flourish in conditions of perpetual frost? Proponents of the Hyperborea theory point out that in those distant times, the climate of the Arctic could have been entirely different, much warmer, which is confirmed by findings of the remains of tropical vegetation and animals frozen in the ice. This could have been a place the Atlanteans sought to reach in order to capture something very important, perhaps not material resources, but the very spiritual knowledge that the Hyperboreans were unwilling to share with those who would use it for evil. This would be a conflict for the very essence of existence, and not just for gold or land, and this is a much more dramatic and logical reason for a war between two such developed societies. Remember also the ancient maps, such as the Piri Reis map, which depict continents with stunning accuracy that seemingly could not have been achieved without satellite technologies, and on them, according to some interpretations, the outline of Antarctica without its ice cover is clearly visible, which dates these maps to an era when the Earth's climate was completely different. If someone compiled such maps, they had the technology to do so, and perhaps it was the Atlanteans or the Hyperboreans, and the very fact of the existence of such maps is indirect evidence of incredibly developed civilizations in the distant past. And if these civilizations possessed such technologies, their military potential must have been simply terrifying. A war between them, if it truly occurred, could not have been like our modern conflicts with tanks and infantry. It was most likely a confrontation where energy and the control of the elements played a key role. Imagine a battle where not planes clash in the sky, but climate weapons cause typhoons and earthquakes, and crystals concentrate energy capable of melting mountains. It is not surprising that after such a war, both civilizations could have been wiped from the face of the earth, leaving us only vague memories in the form of myths. You know, when we talk about legendary civilizations, we often imagine something distant and inaccessible. But if you look closely at the details that have reached us through the thickness of millennia, the picture becomes much more tangible and, I dare say, frightening. We've already discussed the ideological prerequisites of a possible conflict, but now let's focus on what the weapons of these superpowers might have been, for it must have played a decisive role in their mutual destruction. Imagine Atlantis, whose technological might, according to numerous occult sources, was based on crystals. These were not just beautiful stones, they were likely resonators and accumulators of colossal energy. Edgar Cayce, one of the most famous clairvoyants of the 20th century, described in detail the so-called Firestone or Tuawi stone, which was the main energy source for all of Atlantis. It served not only to power cities and transport, including their famous flying craft, but also, most disturbingly, could be reconfigured for military purposes, turning into a weapon capable of causing local or even global cataclysms. If the Atlanteans used this crystal to control weather or tectonic plates, then presumably, in a state of war, they could have directed this power against their main enemy, Hyperborea. This would essentially be a geophysical impact weapon that we, contemporaries, are only beginning to dream about. Hyperborea, in contrast, is presented as a kingdom where technological achievements were inseparable from spiritual wisdom. Their power, according to legend, lay in the control of matter through consciousness and in harmony with natural forces. Legendary priests of Apollo, such as Hubris, whom we've already mentioned, could fly on a golden arrow, predict the future, and heal diseases. This suggests that their technologies might not have been based on machines in our understanding, but on a deep knowledge of the laws of the universe and the ability to operate them mentally. Their weapons, if such existed, might be something like a mental shield or sound weapon, capable of influencing the consciousness and energy structures of the opponent. Think about it. A battle between the crystalline materialistic weaponry of Atlantis and the spiritual mental weaponry of Hyperborea is a confrontation not just of two countries, it is a conflict of two different paths of civilizational development. And here we come to the moment when these two forces collided. Let's assume the Atlanteans, whose civilization is believed to have become increasingly aggressive and expansionist, decided they needed to seize the secrets of Hyperborea, or more likely, eliminate them as the only force capable of resisting their world domination. Imagine the scene. Above the snowy lands of the Arctic, which at that time may have been flourishing, the flying craft of the Atlanteans appear, those very Vimanas or Vajras mentioned in ancient Indian texts. The latter, by the way, describing in detail their aerial battles and weapons capable of emitting deadly rays. This could have been an attack aimed at destroying the spiritual center of Hyperborea, but the counterstrike was probably no less devastating. If the Hyperboreans truly possessed the ability to influence matter through the power of thought or resonant technologies based on harmony, their response could have been aimed at destabilizing the very foundation of Atlantean power, their crystals. If the main 2i energy crystal was disabled, it would instantly paralyze all of Atlantis' infrastructure, causing a chain reaction of technological and natural disasters. And here we return again to Plato, who says that Atlantis sunk in one day and one night. Such a sudden and total catastrophe does not resemble an ordinary earthquake. It is more like the result of using some kind of ultimate weapon. In the Hindu Puranas, which are one of the oldest written sources, descriptions of wars between the Asuras and the Devas are preserved. Many researchers see in these Asuras, who are powerful and materialistic, clear parallels with the Atlanteans, and in the Devas, who represented brighter and spiritual forces, echoes of Hyperborea. These texts contain descriptions of weapons that literally melted warriors and left behind only dust, as well as fire arrows whose effect strongly resembles nuclear explosions, causing glow, smoke, and sickness. Could this war, which appears to have been global, have been the cause of all these mythological accounts of divine intervention and weaponry? Let's consider another aspect, the traces on Earth. We find megalithic structures all over the world, such as Baalbek in Lebanon or the pyramids in Egypt, whose construction and block weight still inspire awe and incomprehension in us. It seems that these structures were built not just by the forces of men, but by a civilization possessing anti-gravity or other technologies unknown to us. Could these megaliths have been part of a defensive network or energy stations built by one of these warring parties? For example, if the Atlanteans were looking for ways to stabilize their crystal technologies on the continents, they might erect such colossal structures. And if these objects were used in the war, their subsequent destruction or disabling could have caused the widespread devastation whose echoes we still see. There is also the hypothesis that this very war led to the change of our planet's geography. If geophysical weapons were used, it is quite possible that a pole shift or a significant displacement of the Earth's crust occurred. Only such a global catastrophe could explain why Hyperborea, which is supposed to have been flourishing, suddenly found itself in a zone of permafrost, and Atlantis sank beneath the water. This idea not only explains the disappearance of the two superpowers, but also provides a logical rationale for all those geological and paleoclimatic anomalies that still baffle official science. And finally, what remains? After such an apocalyptic war, which apparently left no victors, The survivors, carriers of knowledge from both civilizations, scattered throughout the world, carrying with them fragments of their former greatness. In Egypt, in ancient Greece, in the civilizations of Central America, everywhere we see the sudden emergence of complex knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture which seemingly could not have arisen from scratch. This may be the legacy of the war, which became a kind of testament for our new emerging civilization. We are faced with the fact that myths about two great forces, one of which fell due to its pride and technological madness, and the other perhaps sacrificed itself for the sake of saving the planet, permeate the culture of all mankind. This is not just a coincidence. This is the genetic memory of our civilization about the greatest drama that has ever unfolded on Earth. Therefore, my friends, when you look at the starry sky or listen to ancient myths, remember that you may be the heirs of not just savage tribes, but the descendants of those who survived a war where the weapons were not bombs, but the very energy of the universe. Our task is not to repeat the mistakes of the past, not to let our modern technologies, of which we are so proud, become a new 208 crystal that will lead us to a new final flood. Study this topic, look for grains of truth in myths and legends, and then, perhaps, we will be able to piece together the complete picture of what really happened in that distant era when two titans reigned on the planet, Atlantis and Hyperborea. Continue your search, and may this mystery be a source of inspiration and wisdom for you. And we must not forget the cultural heritage. Some theorists suggest that the survivors of the catastrophe, Atlanteans and Hyperboreans, became the gods and teachers who brought knowledge to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and South America, giving rise to new, more primitive civilizations. And this is a very important point. If this is true, the knowledge of the war between them could have been deliberately erased from publicly available sources to prevent the recurrence of such a catastrophe. Perhaps the most closed and esoteric orders and organizations have been guarding the truth about what happened for centuries, and only the chosen few can gain access to it. The history of this possible war is a story of the highest rise and the deepest fall. It teaches us that even the greatest knowledge and incredible power cannot save a civilization from self-destruction, especially when spirituality gives way to greed and the desire for dominance. And this is not just a fairy tale, my friends. This is a warning encrypted in myths, a call to think about how we use the technologies we now possess. We live in a world that is already on the verge of new discoveries, and we would do well to absorb the lessons of those who came before us. Therefore, the next time you hear about the lost city of Atlantis or the mysterious Hyperborea, do not dismiss these stories as mere tales. Behind every legend lies a grain of truth, and in the case of these two superpowers, that truth may be much more captivating and frightening than we can imagine. Was there a war? We cannot give an ambiguous answer, but everything in ancient myths, geological anomalies, and unexplained artifacts persistently whispers to us, perhaps. And this war was the most grandiose and tragic event in the history of our planet. Don't stop at the surface. Study the myths, dig deeper, ask inconvenient questions, and seek answers, for only in this way can we get closer to solving this great global mystery.